Thank you, everyone. The new Lysosomal Disease Network, an endeavor supported for the past 10 years by the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, including NCATS, NINDS, and NIDDK at the NIH. Some of you have heard about the Lysosomal Disease Network over that period of time, and some of you are actually involved in it. But 15, 20 years ago, the NIH started a program to focus clinical research on rare diseases. And that program was called the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network. Now it has grown to be 21 clinical trials, clinical centers, clinical networks, and this is the Lysosomal Disease Network. You can see the other consortia in this group are focused on inherited neuropathies or urea cycle defects, sterile and isopropanol disorders, autonomic rare diseases, rare lung diseases. So it's a diverse group of orphan or rare diseases that are being studied at the clinical level. It's intended to be collaborative research involving multiple sites around the country. It uses centralized data collection and technology development. In fact, the data become public, and there's public resources and education that are used, and it also has a training component. A key element of this consortium process is that the investigators at various sites across the universities and other academic medical centers report their data to the Data Management Coordinating Center, the DMCC. And further, it requires the involvement of patient advocate groups, or sometimes referred to as CPAGs, the Coalition of Patient Advocate Groups. So, our website is here. It's lysosomaldiseasenetwork.org. And this is the visual presentation of things that are happening actively in the Lysosomal Disease Network. If you go to the website, there's breaking news, there's a calendar of events, and you can get actually weekly updates, including a bibliography of references related to lysosomal disease research that goes out every week. We also make announcements such as this. We talked about the Lysosomal Disease Network is going to participate at this point in time with the COPA meeting, Council of Patient Advocates, at the beginning of the meeting this past February in Orlando. So at that meeting, and this is the website for the meeting we attended, the 15th Annual World Symposium, one of the speakers, the gentleman who has received what's called the Roscoe Brady Award this past year, is Dan Togley. And he has a remarkable relationship to the Lysosomal Disease Research Network. He actually is the reason that it exists in many respects. In his presentation, he mentioned the following. He says, the World Symposium, the meeting, began as an outgrowth of an NIH-fostered effort to enhance clinical disease research, particularly the RDCRN, in the wake of 3 concurrent, not funded grant applications to form a Lysosomal Disease Research Center, when applications were first submitted in 2003. Those 3 separate groups congealed, coalesced, started working together at annual meetings for the next 5 years. And the name was now the LDN, the Lysosomal Disease Network, that group of 3 different applicants. It was established as a formative business this meeting that was funded by NIH, and that's where Dr. Togley was supportive of putting lysosomal diseases on the map. That meeting was here in Minneapolis on May 12, 2004. Immediately preceding the first World Scientific Symposium in Minneapolis, right after that. So the network having failed, or 3 different networks interested in lysosomal diseases, failed at the first application in 2003. But with Dr. Togley's support through meeting grants, over the next 5 years, when the next application was opened, the 3 groups combined into one, which we now know as the Lysosomal Disease Network, were able to mount a successful application to get funded. That world meeting which was initially part of the Lysosomal Disease Network. As Dr. Taglia pointed out, had about 154 attendees at that first meeting. But you can see since that time, it's grown tremendously. So the World Symposium, a freestanding meeting now, by 2019, is now attended by about 2,000 experts. There's no reason to think that growth is going to not continue. This is Roscoe Brady, the person after whom the name of the award was used. You'll realize back in 2004, Bill Privet here at the University of Minnesota was the first recipient. Followed that, Henry Tremere, and then Roscoe Brady. In fact, Henry Tremere and Roscoe Brady had many accomplishments, but they actually formed the company Genzyme and were given a lot of credit for all that they had done. Curiously, it was back in 2000, correction, it was back in 1980, when Roscoe Brady purified human urine hexosaminase enzyme and came to the University of Minnesota to do the very first human enzyme replacement attempt. A little baby with Sandhoff disease in a very debilitated state was given the first human enzyme, hexosaminase enzyme, and subsequently underwent a brain biopsy to look at its effect. Did it get across the blood-brain barrier? And I think it's a Tay-Sachs disease, but it's actually Sandhoff disease. So thereafter, this is the history. Oops, a little bit too fast there. This is the history of the Lysosomal Disease Network. Here we see the first application went in 2003. It was not funded, but NIH, over on the middle of the slide, continued to fund small meetings around the country, Minneapolis, Phoenix, and Orlando. And when 2008 rolled around, it was in a good position to apply as a larger, more organized group, and then it was funded for the next 5-year application, and then in 2013 for the third application. Just this past summer and fall, the fourth application was due. And as I'll mention a little bit later, this last application is actually a critical one. It's one that was submitted by all the consortia that want to have 5 more years of funding, with the caveat that they had to create a sustainability plan that would be effective by 2024. In other words, NIH was not going to fund more than 3 5-year grants for this RDCRN mechanism. And to get the next 5 years, one of the requirements was that we write a sustainability plan, I call it a business plan, to generate roughly the equivalent amount of money to keep the network going thereafter. And when you say the equivalent amount of money, the current application is $5.72 million. So that means by 2024, the LDN, if it's to survive, has to become a business entity that brings in $1 million per year on average for survival. So what does that plan look like? What does that application look like? Among the criteria we have to meet, the previous 18 studies that were done prior now has to be condensed down to 5. The new format allowed for only 5 clinical studies by any consortium. We also had to undergo or use an NIH-wide or requirement rather to use a central IRB for any multi-center clinical trials. So instead of each academic unit having its own clinical trial IRB review, there had to be one central IRB. That's an NIH-wide mandate now for any clinical trial funded by NIH. It sounds easy, but most academic institutions have virtually no charge for IRB review. The estimated budget for a central IRB, a commercial IRB like Western, to cover 5 years for the LEN is approximately $90,000. So financially, it's a huge challenge. The other aspect of the application I mentioned here, it's limited to 5 years, and we have to have a sustainability plan in order to even compete. So this particular application, I'll review the history. We talked about that a little bit. I'll talk about the themes, the structure of the network going forward, centers of excellence, work groups, and clinical research projects, as well as how, to some extent, how that's going to be sustained. themes then. This LDN going forward has 4 clinical themes. Clinical trial readiness, that's the initial goal of all the RDCRN. Create natural history data and other things that are needed for somebody with a lot of money, like a pharma company, to come in and take over the work, or at least use the data to test its own new drug or device or therapeutic endeavor. We have to focus on the fact that the world has changed. The newborn screening is now a reality. And here in Minnesota, there are 2 diseases of lysosomes that are part of the newborn screening panel, POMC disease and MPS 1. And furthermore, one area where pharmacological trials really comes up short is in long-term outcomes. And even though this is a national network funded by a U.S. entity, we really have to go and achieve global reach. With that in mind, let's talk about the first theme, clinical trial readiness. Oops, back up. So the goal of the LDN is to collect data systematically and uniformly across clinical research centers in order to create a database and expertise for interpretation to define the parameters against which clinical trial effectiveness should be measured. That's the first thing. The second is newborn screening. With the advent of newborn screening technology and addition of 2 lysosomal diseases to the federally recommended uniform screening panel, the RUS, the LDN has the opportunity to promote and expand early diagnosis of affected patients, access the clinical phenotypes of these diseases in a way that's never been done before, because we didn't know the disease existed in some children until the symptoms were very severe, as well as promote and assist the implementation of this quintessential early diagnosis mechanism. The third theme is long-term outcomes. The effect of therapy is often assessed in the brief 3 to 7 year lifespan of an FDA-supervised and reviewed clinical trial. To minimize the adverse events observed during which trials are done, the philosophy of minimal effective dose, or MED rather, has become the usual shortest path for a company to a new drug approval. However, the unintended consequences of focusing on MED is to approve treatments that are inherently minimally effective and very short of a cure or optimal or sometimes even good or adequate when assessed by the patient's long-term outcome. To identify the unmet needs of incomplete treatments, assessing long-term outcomes in a systematic manner is critical, whether looking at the natural history of the disease or ultimate effect of a drug that's approved. Then the next theme of the network is global reach. One rationale for developing a national network for rare diseases is to facilitate gathering data from a sufficient number of affected individuals, as well as to provide optimal care by experts local to the patient. By virtue of the internet, language translation services and the use of the central IRB and online consenting, the principle can be extended to include research subjects from around the globe. Everyone with a rare condition will have increasing opportunity to participate in research, to be included in studies that measure the disease as it presents in different environments with differential backgrounds, while factoring in the variable ethnic geographic distribution of the variable genetic components. So those are the themes. Let's look at the structure briefly of the Lysosomal Disease Network. We have an external advisory committee, an administrative core, and pilot or feasibility cores when money is available. And we also have a council of research experts, the core, the Council of Patient Advocates, COPA, the Council of Industry Leaders, COIL, and the Council of Detection of Newborns, CODON. So what about these centers of excellence? How does that fit in? To create a solid network, people that are really committed, and despite the fact they may be focused primarily on MPS disease as an institution, or maybe focused primarily on POMC disease as an institution, each node on the Lysosomal Disease Network will have to be competent at treating all lysosomal diseases and counseling and providing other information. That's the idea that is being pursued to gather ample data across the country. And it will also essentially raise the standard of care at those places too, because examination knowledge always drives better medicine. These are the signatory centers of excellence These are the ones that we funded initially by the NIH and the LDN, presuming we would get that grant. Now, beyond that, there are a lot of centers that would want to be involved as nodes in the Lysosomal Disease Network, such as Children's in Phoenix, such as the NIH itself. So I think this number of nodes on the network will greatly expand, particularly if we recognize them as centers of excellence. And the way we're going to do that is through actual certification process. And the first certification process will be here at the University of Minnesota in October. A group will come in on Thursday night typically. On Friday, someone like Ashley Schneider, are you here, Ashley, someplace? She'll be looking at the books, doing the data review, while the clinicians, myself, perhaps Mark Patterson from Mayo, perhaps our administrative associate, Brenda Makita, will look at the facility's capabilities, what it can do, what it cannot do. We'll write a report describing the deficits and how they can improve over the next year and be ready for a better inspection result. And then finally on Saturday, we have World Fair meeting. And many of you know that because you attend it every October. And this year's October 19th meeting will be at the McNamara Center. So with that structure in place, we can look at the clinical research projects. I'll go through these pretty quickly. There's only 5. And there's some generality to this model, as well as some specificity. The first study, called Everybody's In, is a clinical research study that enrolls individuals with any lysosomal disease while accomplishing 4 important clinical research studies, as well as providing a robust population for new future studies. This study will embrace all 4 of the LDN themes: clinical trial readiness, global reach, newborn screening, and long-term outcomes. The pool of subjects is a substantial and growing source of future funded clinical projects, part of the sustainability plan. Make this data available to people, particularly from pharma, who would like to support the ongoing activities and have access to these data, and the experts of the LDN. And they provides the engine out of the stability plan, sustainability plan, and this should actually grow and go on beyond 2024. The first study, Everybody's In, pardon me, has these specific aims. To first properly consent individuals and confirm a diagnosis of lysosomal disease for enrollment in observational and survey-style clinical research. And everyone's offered an opportunity to have continuing contact with the network should a study come along that might be of interest to them. There are actually online surveys and other online activities that can be done so the patient can enroll one of the formal nodes on the network, but they can also be the Mongolian person living in a yurt, or somebody in the desert that can be in downtown New York but just not go to the medical center. They can enroll online in a properly consented online consent form. Then you can see the other studies are to receive adequate diagnostic information to confirm we do have the right diagnosis, particularly by providing DNA or genomic information to confirm the mutation. We'll look at the effect of adults in a live, pardon me, and outcome measure, looking at milestones, a test that we've invented called LISA. And then we'll also establish growth curves. This was a suggestion of one of the patient advocate groups, actually. So people with, say, Sanfilippo syndrome can plot their child's growth in comparison to other children, and down the road that should provide extremely valuable data for patients who had treatment and hopefully are deviating from the pathologic slope. So, and finally, 6, we'll exploit the growing database of affected individuals and network experts for participation in additional studies as they come up. So, the second study relates to Pompe disease, and Priya Krishnani is the head scientific investigator on that. But without reading this, we're dealing with the fact in Pompe disease that the drug was really designed for adults. However, it saved the lives of many, many newborns. But it's also a good example of how the therapy is falling short. If we give the currently available enzyme replacement to a newborn, which is an absolute must, that child will survive much longer. They won't die within the first year of life. By the time they're 3 or 4 years of age, they'll be crippled. They will not be able to ambulate on their own. The current prescribed dose of that drug is not adequate to maintain a decent quality of life. Currently, we're treating one infant with 4 times the standard FDA-approved dose. And the patient gets it 3 or 4 times a week, and it may go to weekly. And that can be done by modern infusion technology. But that's the only way to provide good quality of life for an adult who is surviving otherwise lethal infantile disease. That's already been shown in the Netherlands and in Taiwan, where higher doses have been used. We're showing it now here with our first patient. So these are the specific aims. I won't deal with the complexity of it, but the first aim looks at that issue: how do we prevent immune rejection of the enzyme in those patients who are CRIM negative and could make an antibody that shuts down production of the drug that's being given. Aim 2 looks at the phenotypes in a slightly different way in their long-term outcome. And specific aim looks at something that's pretty been ignored in pompe disease, which we're finding out now. There's not just a muscle component of the disease, but there's also a central nervous system disease. So then, the next study is Fabry disease. And I'm not going to read the whole background here, but it involves, we think of the kidney primarily, but that's not at all true, of course. These patients have central nervous lesions, central nervous system lesions, white matter in particular. They have increased risk of stroke and heart attack. We also have things such as POTS disease, postural-orthostatic tachycardia, which actually is probably associated with migraine-like central nervous system disease. They have a plethora of problems. So the investigators will be primarily running that study nationwide with Dr. Mike Maurer and Andrew Cortez. And if we go to study number 4, I think I skipped over MPS. Those are the specific aims, and I won't read the details on that, but it's looking at renal effects and the effects of enzyme replacement therapy. And it's also looking at the skin, and it's looking at the cardiac components, including the structure of the heart as well as electrophysiology. So the next study, that's by the way laid out there in specific aims, involving neurocognition. I'm sorry, we're already on the 4th one. Mucopolysaccharidosis diseases. Here, there's a huge amount of expertise in this field, and there's so many people involved in so many well-understood aspects of a very, very bad disease that we have individuals leading the neurocognition study nationwide, psychosocial aspects of the disease, neuroimaging, physical symptom score, which industry is also already asked to use and being licensed to them for that purpose, and bone and joint disease and cardiopulmonary disease, and as well as transplant and other novel therapies that are being implemented therapies. And so then we're down to the 5th study, and this is the gangliosidosis. Many of you know this is Tay-Sachs disease, hexosaminidase A deficiency, Sandoff disease, also known as hexosaminidase B deficiency, and GM1 gangliosidosis, which is a beta-glucosidase lysosomal enzyme disease. They're catastrophic, progressive neurodegenerative diseases that are lethal during childhood in the infantile form. And the juvenile form, they're also horribly debilitating, and even the late onset form leaves mid-age people crippled and unable to breathe. They wind up on a ventilator. During the past 9 years, this study has been going on, headed by James Jarnes, and that progress, that natural history, has already enrolled 50 subjects, the world's largest, the globe's largest study of the natural history of that disorder. They've actually fulfilled the obligation of NIH to create a natural history study and understanding of these diseases that will attract pharma and other academic centers to create therapies. In fact, we're working on one ourselves here, and there are actually 7 companies right now looking at various forms of enzyme replacement therapy and gene therapy. So that is the ultimate impact of the Lysosomal Disease Network, and the way it creates therapies for now untreatable diseases, or poorly treated diseases for that matter. So these are the specific aims: to characterize and describe the clinical phenotype, to measure the neurobehavioral outcome in particular. There's a range going from infantile disease to late-onset disease. To qualify a spectrum of ganglioside serum and biomarker studies, and have been done in a clear certified laboratory where they are suitable for clinical trials. And then, fourth aim, to advance the current neuroimaging technology of quantitative MRI from 3T instrumentation to an increased level of sensitivity and resolution using a 7T MRI machine, as well as fine biomarkers. So, what about the sustainability plan? We've got 5 years to build a business, or apply for a lot of other NIH grants, or get other foundations to support this research. And we're starting to see that already. Is that feasible? Well, and what's going to be the impact of a long-term study like this? Well, many of you know the Framingham Heart Study. It's a lot of the information we understand about cholesterol, strokes, heart attacks. It's limited in some ways because it only involves Caucasians in the town of Framingham. So that is the model. It's totally supported by NIH, and it's extremely valuable. And we want to take in some elements of that, but the one thing we don't have is massive NIH funding for the whole consortium. Another one is the nurses study. I think it's 3,000 nurses that have made a lifetime commitment to be involved in longitudinal assessment of their outcomes. This is why we know so much about women's health that we did not know 20 years ago. Because women in particular, in this case, very committed subjects. They're nurses, they understand the medical field, they understand the importance of research. They've been involved in that long study. Unfortunately, it's a great model, but it's funded totally by NIH. And it will go on forever and ever. But there are some alternatives that work. For instance, some of you might have had an ice bucket dropped on your head. And through that, the ALS Association has made so much money. It is one of the consortia of the RDCRN, but they barely mention it. What they do from their independent group, they certify and inspect centers of excellence. They designate them as gold, silver, and platinum. And they bring in other research to get done at those centers, as well as clinical care. And they're a fantastic model because, except for the relatively little they get from the NIH, which is not even mentioned in any of their literature, they get a lot done. And so one has to be creative about how to raise additional money, beyond traditional granting methods. So that's our challenge. That's our model. We'll do it next 4 years. And of course, Joe Naglia pointed this one out to me, SWAB. When you think about how that group has done similar things, look at their academic accomplishments. 31 open clinical trials right now, over 1,000 member sites, and more than 260,000 patients. That's our model. So people can learn from. Well, going back to this, here's our website. If you click on this button, you can get on the regular weekly mailing list, learn about things as they are announced on the network. And I'm learning a lot myself. Over the past year, I've taken on trying to understand sailboat racing, trying to learn about sailboat racing. These little 22-foot boats. But I've learned a lot about racing sailboats, not just cruising around, but racing sailboats. One of those take-homes for me is it takes a whole crew to get on the right heading and to get to the mark. In these boats, there are 4 members on the boat. They're just not sitting there getting suntans. Each member of that crew has a specific job. They look at the wind, they look at the current, they look at boats around them. If you're going to win a race, you've got to have a crew that's operating in a well-trained and organized manner if you want to get to the mark. You can't go in a straight line. You have to tack and jive. So one has to look for the opportunities, see what the unmet need is, and try to fulfill that. And I think by having a large database of lysosomal patients, not from just your hospital or the U.S., but from globally, it'll provide a great resource that others will want to exploit. The winds and current are always changing, and you can get taken off course, or you can exploit that and move so you go faster. So being flexible and being aware of all those factors is important. So I think with that, I'll conclude the talk and take any questions.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. The focus on FDA approval and minimum effective dose is it sounds very challenging in the care of these kinds of patients. I'm wondering what kind of pushback you get for getting higher doses of enzyme replacement therapy covered by insurance companies when there's a disincentive for them to cooperate with that.
Yeah, it is really easy actually to get off-label use, including higher doses, from insurance companies if you go to the right person. There's a real talent to writing those kind of letters. And Jean Jarnes, she's a PharmD actually, writes the best letters in the world. And that's because she understands what they're looking for and what kind of proof they need. Proof is what you need. In the cancer world, Congress passed a law that says if you have 2 or more published journal articles for off-label use of a particular oncologic therapy, you should approve it. It's a federal law. It does not extend to other diseases. It's unique for cancer. But the same principle applies. Getting the higher dose of Lumazyme, sorry, I should have said Avucerase, alpha, was a matter of convincing the need for it. In fact, that's what the whole network does. Provide that data to say, yeah, we might have an FDA-approved therapy and you want to provide it, but look at what your long-term outcome is going to be. Is it adequate? You need some variation. A lot of our pediatric drugs, right, are off-label. There's enough of them around that insurance companies don't get too bent out of shape. But it's bringing knowledge to the fore and arguing it strongly. I think that's the only way we're going to succeed in that.
Hi, Chet. Thanks for the presentation. Can you expand a little more on the certification of lysosomal disease centers and who established what the validation is going to look like and what the implications of all those things are? Because I'm kind of interested in how that stuff works.
Yeah, I mean, that's a work in progress, Mike. Thanks very much for asking about that. You know, hospitals pay a lot for JCO certification. And there are strict criteria. And somebody has to lay those out. So the way the Lysosomal Disease Network is doing it is, over the next 5 years, we have funded 13 centers, just to be a center without actually doing any work yet. And those people are going to write the rules. We're laying down a group of requirements and capabilities, and do you have to have a bone marrow transplant yet or not? Well, that's not always going to be acceptable. So that's not going to be one of the criteria. But what will be a criteria is a review of your practice. And the people who are now PIs at those 13 centers are going to work together to say, what should be the standard of care? And what should be the standards for our research? Are you filling in the databases? And that's sort of the research end. Are you seeing the patient? Are you telling all the patients if they don't want to do it in clinic that day, telling them you've got a network, a website you can go to? So that's going to be self-written over the next 5 years. For the first 5 years, we have signatory groups who are not yet certified, or they're called maybe preliminarily approved or something. But we'll develop that as a group, decide what are the quality of care and quality of research criteria that have to be met.
So, Chet, I have a question. One of the interests that many of us around here have had is long-term follow-up of patients. And you've built that into the current grant. Are you going to spin that off into its own potentially NIH-funded study later on?
It sounds like you're giving us our marching orders, Joe.
I think, well, it's work for us in cancer is to treat them and then come back with a grant later on to say, well, let's find out what we actually did. And I think in your group of patients, it's probably more important. So how do you envision keeping these patients together in a cohort going forward?
Yeah, Joe, thank you for that idea. Like several you've given us on this application, actually. For every step of the way, that's going to be a challenge. How do you get somebody involved when they really are not getting anything out of it? Well, the answer is pretty easy. You get somebody, you give them something back. So one of those things is creating graphs or other measures of how are other patients doing. And then an individual can look at that and say, it's worth me staying involved in this because then I get to see how other patients are doing. It's something the LDN is providing for them. There's a lot of value in just being enrolled in a study. In fact, I have a relative who just asked me, should she's getting a treatment now, should I be in this study they just throw at me? And I said, you always get better clinical care if you're in a research study. Nowadays, IRB requirements are so tight. There's probably very, very low risk, or at least a known risk to you compared to the alternative of being in any study. So that's a great opportunity. You're going to see your doctor more frequently or somebody more frequently. You're going to have it done free. And ultimately, you're going to learn, as well as just contributing to the rest of the world's knowledge. So it's that kind of thing. And that's where we have to tack and dive, I mean, that's all something we're going to have to figure out. But there's a lot of models that have achieved that.
Chad, I think the sustainability plan is a crucial part of the grant, but I think it's also a crucial part of how are we taking care of these children with rare diseases as they get older, and the long-term follow-up comes into that plan. Are there funds or plans to, you mentioned education, to train our adult colleagues to partner with us in individuals with these rare diseases, or to fund our continued care of them? How do you see that fitting in with the grant or in practice?
That's very good thinking, Brad. And because we're here in this particular department, we're so good at taking care of patients after they've reached 18. In fact, our genetics program is mandated to take care of patients of any age. And we're fortunate enough to be housed in a very, very good pediatric unit. But it's a bigger problem. We find that patients with cystinosis in particular are taken care of pretty well, during childhood, and their surgeons see them, and then the nephrology group, takes over, and the nephrologist here, I think elsewhere, largely becomes the primary care physician for a child with cystinosis. But what happens when they reach 18? They can't be seen here anymore, or at any pediatric hospital. And so that's a huge gap. They don't find that warm pediatric attitude that really is more comprehensive. So that very subject came up yesterday. There was somebody coming in from an industry, and they said they're getting ready to do something like that. They wanted us to be involved, and if we have any ideas about that. How do we train or find care for people with very serious diseases who don't have that in the adult world? So you're right. I think that will be an offshoot of that program. Do you want to head that program up? I'd love it. Actually, Brad had a lot of ideas that got some of these projects moving along. Think about the taxi ride there. Let's back to Broadway.
Other questions for Dr. Whitley? All right, Chet, thank you very much.
I forgot one slide.
One more slide.
Two more. A well-trained crew goes faster. You got to work at it. You got to put some time and energy. You got to have knowledge. That's the council of experts. But also sail with your friends. That sounds warm and fuzzy. In the racing world, you want to stay with the other boats because even if you think the better wind is over there, those are the ones you're competing with. So you sail with them, and they take advantage of other advantages to get to the front of the pack. But I like the idea of just sailing with your friends, period. Thanks.